I thought the hardest part of becoming a mother would be giving birth. I was wrong. The hardest part began the moment I carried my baby through the front door of our home. Everyone told me those first weeks would be filled with quiet mornings, sleepy smiles, and precious moments I'd remember for the rest of my life. Instead, those weeks became the time when I slowly stopped recognizing my own voice. Not because my husband was cruel, not because our church demanded it, but because one person convinced me that every decision about my own body belonged to someone else, and I believed her, for far too long. My name is Leah. The day my son was born was the happiest day of my life. After 14 hours of labor, I finally heard his tiny cry fill the room. The midwife smiled. "He's healthy." Those 2 words erased every ounce of pain I had felt. When they placed him in my arms, I couldn't stop staring at his tiny hands. His fingers curled around mine as though he already trusted me. I whispered the only words I could think of. "Welcome home, little one." Across the room, my husband Eli wiped tears from his face. He had always been a quiet man, the kind who showed love through actions rather than speeches. But that afternoon, he walked across the room, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I've never seen anything more beautiful." Not once did he mention how exhausted I looked. Not once did he complain about the long hours. He simply looked at our son with wonder. For a moment, I believed everything would be exactly as I had imagined. Peaceful, simple, full of gratitude. I didn't know our real challenge hadn't even begun. 3 days later, we returned home. Our small farmhouse sat exactly where it always had, surrounded by fields that were beginning to turn green with spring. As Eli carried our bags inside, I held our son close against my chest. The familiar smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. I smiled. "My mother must have visited." Eli hesitated. "No." Before I could ask another question, the kitchen door opened. My mother-in-law stepped into the hallway. "Martha?" She smiled warmly. "Welcome home." I hugged her carefully. "I didn't know you were coming." "I'll be staying for a while." I looked toward Eli. He smiled. "I thought you'd appreciate the help." And honestly, at that moment, I did. I could barely walk without discomfort. I was exhausted. Every movement reminded me that my body was still healing. Having another pair of experienced hands sounded like a blessing. If only I had known. That first evening, Martha prepared supper while I rested with the baby. She seemed kind, gentle, attentive. When the baby cried during the meal, I immediately stood. "I'll feed him." She lightly touched my arm. "No. You need to rest. I can bring him to you when he's calmer." It sounded reasonable. I sat back down. A few minutes later, she returned carrying my son. "Here." I smiled gratefully. Perhaps everyone had been right. Perhaps having an experienced mother nearby truly was a gift. The next morning, I woke before sunrise when I heard the baby crying. Still half asleep, I reached toward his cradle. Before my hand touched him, Martha quietly entered the room. "I've already changed him." "Oh. You should stay in bed. I can feed him." "I don't mind." She smiled. "But I do." "Your job is healing." Again, her words sounded loving. Who was I to argue? Over the next several days, little things began changing. Whenever I stood to wash dishes, Martha gently guided me back into my chair. Whenever I carried the laundry basket, she took it from my hands. Whenever I mentioned walking outside, she shook her head. Not yet. I assumed she simply wanted to protect me. After all, she had raised 6 children. Surely she knew more than I did. One afternoon, I reached for a slice of fresh apple pie. Before I could take a bite, Martha quietly removed the plate. "You shouldn't eat that." I blinked. "Why not?" "It's too rich. You need simple foods." "I've always liked apple pie." She smiled politely. "You can enjoy it later." Instead, she handed me a bowl of plain broth. I laughed softly. "You sound just like a nurse." She didn't laugh. "It's what women in this family have always done." That sentence stayed with me. Women in this family. Not church teaching, not medical advice, family tradition. Still, I didn't question her. The following week, my own mother arrived carrying homemade bread and fresh strawberry preserves. I hadn't seen her since the birth. The moment she stepped inside, tears filled my eyes. "Mother." She embraced me carefully. "How are you feeling?" Before I could answer, Martha spoke. "She's recovering well." My mother looked at me instead. I asked Leah. For the first time, I noticed tension between the two women. "I'm tired," I admitted, "but I'm getting stronger." Mother smiled. "I thought perhaps I could stay a few days." Before I could respond, Martha answered, "That won't be necessary." The room became uncomfortably quiet. My mother looked surprised. "I only wanted to help. We already have everything under control." My mother glanced toward me. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted another familiar face, another voice, but I remained silent. A few minutes later, she quietly gathered the basket she had brought. "I'll visit again soon." After she left, the house felt emptier than before. That night, I finally asked Eli, "Why couldn't my mother stay?" He looked uncomfortable. "Martha thought too many people in the house might overwhelm you." "But I wanted her here." "I know." He sighed. "Mother only wants what's best." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, something inside me felt unsettled. As the days passed, Martha began making more decisions without asking me. She decided when the baby should sleep, when he should be held, which blankets he should use, even which chair I should sit in while feeding him. Every suggestion was delivered with the same calm sentence. "This is how our family has always done it." One afternoon, while rocking my son near the window, I quietly asked, "Did the bishop ever teach these things?" Martha looked genuinely surprised. "No." "Then why must I follow them?" Her smile disappeared for the first time. "Because traditions protect families." I nodded slowly, but a question settled deep inside my heart. If these weren't church rules, and they weren't my doctor's advice, then why did I suddenly feel as though I needed permission to make even the smallest decision about my own child? That evening, as I watched Martha carry my son into another room without asking me, I realized something that frightened me. I had spent nearly 3 weeks obeying rules I had never agreed to, and somehow I had begun believing they were God's will. I didn't yet know how wrong I was, or that one quiet conversation with the bishop would completely change the way I understood obedience, family, and my place as a mother. By the beginning of the 4th week after my son was born, I had stopped asking questions. It was easier that way. Every morning followed the same pattern. I woke when I heard my baby cry. Before I could reach his cradle, Martha was already there. "I've changed him. I've wrapped him in a fresh blanket. He'll be ready to eat in a moment." Then she would place him gently into my arms, wait while I nursed him, and lift him away again the moment he finished. At first I told myself she was helping. Then I realized something that made my heart ache. I was beginning to feel like a visitor in my own home. One afternoon I walked into the kitchen and found Martha humming softly while rocking my son to sleep. She looked peaceful. So did he. For a moment, guilt washed over me. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe this was simply how experienced mothers cared for new mothers. But then she looked up and said something that changed everything. "Don't wake him." I wasn't going to. "He settles better with me." Those 5 words settled heavily in my chest. "He settles better with me." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt something crack. That evening, after Martha had gone to bed, I finally spoke to Eli. "Can we talk?" He looked up from repairing a lantern. "Of course." "I miss our son." He frowned. "He's asleep upstairs." "That's not what I mean." I took a slow breath. "I feel like I'm asking permission to be his mother." Eli immediately shook his head. "No one thinks that." "I do." The room fell silent. He set the lantern aside and came to sit beside me. "Mother is only trying to help." "I know. But help shouldn't make someone feel invisible." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. I'll talk to her. When? He hesitated. Soon. That single word told me everything. Soon meant not today. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe never. Eli loved peace. If avoiding conflict meant everyone stayed calm, he would usually choose silence. Normally, I admired that about him. Now it made me feel alone. The next morning, I decided to do something simple. I dressed the baby before Martha came downstairs. When she entered the room, she stopped in the doorway. You used the blue blanket. Yes. It's too heavy. He seemed comfortable. Without another word, she quietly removed the blanket and replaced it with another one. She wasn't rude. She wasn't angry. She simply acted as though my choice didn't matter. I stood there holding the folded blue blanket, wondering why such a small moment hurt so much. Later that afternoon, my friend Hannah stopped by with fresh flowers. She smiled warmly when she saw me. You look tired. I laughed softly. I am. She glanced toward the baby. May I hold him? Before I could answer, Martha spoke from across the room. He just fell asleep. It's better not to disturb him. Hannah nodded politely. Oh, of course. She stayed only a few minutes before leaving. As I watched her buggy disappear down the lane, I realized she had spent more time talking to Martha than to me. After she left, I quietly asked, why couldn't Hannah hold him? Martha looked genuinely confused. Because he was sleeping. He usually sleeps through being held. She smiled. Perhaps. But I thought it best. Again, she had thought, she had decided, and somehow I had disappeared from the decision entirely. A few days later, my body reminded me that healing wasn't only emotional. While carrying a basket of clean clothes upstairs, I suddenly felt dizzy. The room spun around me. I grabbed the railing to keep from falling. Martha rushed over immediately. I told you not to carry laundry. I'm all right. No, you've done too much. She took the basket from my hands and guided me back downstairs. As I sat in the rocking chair, I quietly whispered, I don't even know what I'm allowed to do anymore. She paused. What do you mean? I mean, I don't decide anything. Her expression softened. I'm trying to protect you. I know. But protection and control don't always feel the same. For the first time since she had arrived, she didn't have an answer. That evening, I found an old journal tucked inside my bedside drawer. I had started writing in it during my pregnancy. The final entry before my son's birth read, I can't wait to hold my baby whenever he cries. I wonder who he'll look like. I hope I become the kind of mother who makes him feel safe. I stared at those words until tears blurred the page. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling like his mother. The following Sunday, our church gathered for worship. It was my first time returning since giving birth. Women smiled warmly. Several congratulated us. Many asked how the baby was doing. Almost no one asked how I was doing. I didn't blame them. Everyone's attention naturally went to the newest little life. Still, I felt strangely lonely standing in a room full of people. After the service ended, an older woman approached me. Her name was Sister Ruth. She had raised 5 children and was known for her quiet wisdom. She smiled gently. How are you healing? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in weeks. Before I could answer, Martha stepped beside us. She's recovering well. Sister Ruth didn't take her eyes off me. I asked Leah. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then I quietly answered, I'm trying. Sister Ruth nodded as though she understood far more than I had said. Before leaving, she leaned close and whispered, When you're ready. The bishop and his wife are always willing to listen. I watched her walk away. Those words echoed in my mind the entire buggy ride home. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood beside my son's cradle. He opened his tiny eyes and wrapped his little hand around my finger. He didn't know about traditions. He didn't know about family expectations. He only knew one thing. I was his mother. At that moment, I made a decision. Not because I wanted to argue, not because I wanted to embarrass Martha, but because I needed to know the truth. The next morning, while Eli was in the barn and Martha was hanging laundry outside, I quietly saddled the horse. I wasn't running away. I wasn't leaving my family. I was going to ask one simple question that had been haunting me for weeks. Were these truly God's expectations? Or had I confused one family's traditions with the voice of faith? I prayed the bishop would help me understand. I never expected his answer to change not only my recovery, but the future of our entire family. The next morning, I left before anyone noticed. The air was cool, and the roads were still quiet as I guided the buggy toward the bishop's farmhouse. My heart pounded with every mile. I wasn't going there to complain about Martha. I wasn't looking for someone to take my side. I only wanted an answer to one question. Had I been disobeying God, or simply obeying someone else's expectations? When I arrived, the bishop's wife, Esther, answered the door. She smiled warmly. "Leah, what a pleasant surprise." Then she looked more closely at my face. Her smile faded. "You look exhausted." I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to notice. Not the baby, not the house. Me. Before I knew it, tears filled my eyes. Esther gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Come inside." She led me into the kitchen where a kettle rested on the stove. A few moments later, the bishop joined us. He greeted me kindly. "What brings you here this morning?" For several seconds, I couldn't find the words. Finally, I whispered, "I don't know whether I've been honoring my family or losing myself." The bishop didn't interrupt. He simply listened. So I told him everything. How Martha had come to stay after the birth. How she decided when I rested, what I should eat, when I should hold my baby, who could visit, even how I should comfort my own son. When I finished, I lowered my eyes. I've tried to be respectful. I truly have. But I don't feel like his mother anymore. The room remained silent. Then the bishop asked a question I wasn't expecting. "What does your husband think?" I hesitated. "He believes his mother is only trying to help. And you?" "I believe she loves us. But, I don't think she knows when helping becomes controlling." The bishop slowly nodded. Then he said something that completely surprised me. "Leah, everything you've described sounds like family custom, not church teaching." I stared at him. "What?" "Our church encourages families to care for new mothers." He smiled gently. "But we do not teach that a mother must surrender every decision about her child." I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted. "So, I'm allowed to decide?" "Of course." He looked genuinely puzzled. "Why would you believe otherwise?" I laughed through my tears. "Because everyone kept saying, 'This is how we've always done it.'" The bishop smiled kindly. "Traditions can be beautiful, but traditions are poor masters." His wife quietly added, "A loving tradition should support a young mother. It should never silence her." For several moments I couldn't speak. Weeks of confusion suddenly became clear. I hadn't been failing as a mother. I had simply forgotten that God had entrusted this child to Eli and me, not to everyone else. Before I left, the bishop asked one final question. "Would you like me to visit your home?" My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want Martha embarrassed. I didn't want the family divided. But I also knew nothing would change if no one spoke. After a long pause, I quietly nodded. "Yes." 2 evenings later, the bishop and Esther arrived at our farmhouse. Martha looked surprised. "What an unexpected visit." The bishop smiled warmly. "We were nearby and thought we'd stop in." No one believed that explanation. After supper, he asked if we could all sit together. Father, mother, husband, wife. No one was accused. No one was criticized. Instead, the bishop began with a simple question. "What has these first weeks been like for everyone?" Martha answered first. "I've only wanted Leah to recover well." I know how difficult childbirth can be. The bishop nodded. I believe you. Then he turned to Eli. And you? Eli lowered his eyes. I've tried to keep peace. The bishop smiled gently. Sometimes keeping peace and avoiding conflict are not the same thing. Those words struck Eli immediately. Then the bishop looked at me. What has your experience been? I swallowed hard. For the first time, I spoke honestly. I've never doubted that Martha loves us. I looked toward her. And I'm grateful for everything you've done. Her expression softened. But I don't feel trusted. I don't feel heard. I feel like someone else became my baby's mother while I was still trying to heal. Silence filled the room. Martha looked shocked. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know. But I do. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Esther quietly broke the silence. Martha, may I ask you something? Of course. When you became a mother, who taught you these traditions? Martha smiled sadly. My mother. And who taught her? My grandmother. Esther nodded. So you've carried them for generations. Yes. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Were you ever allowed to choose differently? Martha opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no words. The room remained silent. Slowly. Very slowly. Tears filled her eyes. I don't think anyone ever asked me what I wanted. Her voice trembled. I simply repeated what had been done to me. I looked at her differently in that moment, not as someone trying to control me, but as a woman who had never been given the freedom to discover another way. The bishop quietly folded his hands. Then perhaps, this family has an opportunity, not to abandon every tradition, but to keep only those that truly reflect love. No one argued. No one defended themselves. We simply sat together, listening, thinking, healing. But later that night, after the bishop had gone home, Martha knocked softly on my bedroom door. I need to tell you something. The tears already in her eyes told me that whatever she had carried for years, she was finally ready to let it go. When I opened the bedroom door, Martha was standing in the hallway with her hands tightly folded together. For the first time since she had come to stay with us, she looked uncertain, not confident, not composed, just tired. I couldn't sleep, she said quietly. May I come in? I nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. Our son was asleep in his cradle, breathing softly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Martha looked at the baby and whispered, I owe you an apology. I felt my heart soften. You don't have to. No. She gently shook her head. I do. She sat in the rocking chair beside the cradle. I've spent weeks telling myself I was helping you. Tears gathered in her eyes. But tonight I realized something. I never asked what you needed. I remained silent. She continued. When I was 23, I gave birth to my first baby. I had never heard her speak about that time. My labor lasted nearly 2 days. I was frightened. I was exhausted. My own mother arrived before I even held my daughter. A faint, painful smile crossed her face. She loved me. I never doubted that. But from the moment she entered the house, she made every decision. Exactly as I later did with you. I looked at her in surprise. You didn't choose that? She slowly shook her head. I didn't know I had a choice. She looked down at her hands. My mother used to say, good women don't question the women who came before them. So I never questioned. When my daughters had children, I did exactly what had been done to me. When you married Eli, I promised myself I would care for you the same way. A tear slipped down her cheek. I truly believed I was giving you love. She looked at me. I didn't realize I was also taking away your confidence." Those words settled deep in my heart. For weeks, I had imagined this conversation ending with one of us proving the other wrong. Instead, we were both discovering the same truth. Pain can travel quietly through generations, not because people are cruel, because they never learned another way. I sat beside Martha. "You love your grandson." "I do." "And I know you love me." She nodded, unable to speak. "But love isn't only about doing what we believe is best. It's also about listening." Fresh tears filled her eyes. "I forgot that." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in linen. "I want you to have this." I unfolded the cloth. Inside was a tiny pair of knitted baby booties. They were Eli's. I made them before he was born. They've stayed in my cedar chest for almost 30 years. I smiled. "They're beautiful." She gently placed them in my hands. "I'd like his mother to decide when he wears them." His mother, not our baby, not my grandson. His mother. It was the first time she had spoken those words. The next morning felt different. When our son cried, Martha started toward the cradle out of habit. Then she stopped. She smiled at me instead. "I think someone is calling for his mother." I walked across the room and lifted my son into my arms. He looked up at me with sleepy eyes before resting his head against my shoulder. Such a small moment, yet it felt like getting back a piece of myself. Later that morning, Martha asked, "What would you like for breakfast?" I laughed softly. "No one has asked me that in weeks." She smiled. "I'm asking now. Pancakes?" She laughed for the first time since arriving. "Pancakes it is." As the days passed, our home slowly changed, not because every tradition disappeared. Many remained. We still shared evening meals together. We still helped one another with chores. We still prayed before sunrise and before bed. But now, traditions became invitations instead of expectations. Martha would offer advice. Then she would say, "But you're his mother. You decide." At first, those words felt unfamiliar. Soon, they became a source of quiet confidence. The biggest change, however, happened in Eli. One evening after supper, he asked me to walk with him to the edge of the pasture. The sky glowed orange as the sun disappeared beyond the fields. He stopped beneath the old maple tree where he had proposed to me years before. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "For what?" "I thought staying silent would keep peace in our home." He lowered his eyes. But silence wasn't peace. It was loneliness. I squeezed his hand. "I needed you." "I know." And I wasn't there. He took a deep breath. "I've learned something these past weeks." "What?" "A husband doesn't protect his family by avoiding difficult conversations. He protects them by having them." I smiled. "I think that's something we'll both remember." Months passed. Summer slowly became autumn. Our son learned to crawl across the kitchen floor, chasing wooden toys Eli carved for him. Martha still visited often, but now she always knocked before entering. She no longer rearranged the nursery. She no longer answered questions directed at me. Sometimes she would simply sit in the rocking chair and ask, "How are you doing today?" It was such a simple question, yet it reminded me that I mattered, not only as a mother, but as a person. One afternoon, while watching our son laugh as Eli tossed him gently into the air, Martha quietly stood beside me. "You know, I used to believe being a good mother meant never changing." She smiled at her grandson. "Now I think being a good mother and a good grandmother means never being too proud to learn." I wrapped my arm around hers. "I think that's true." Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether those first weeks after childbirth were the hardest season of my life. In many ways they were. Not because of sleepless nights, not because of physical pain, but because I almost forgot that becoming a mother didn't mean surrendering my voice. It meant learning to use it with love. The traditions passed down through families can be beautiful. They connect generations. They preserve memories. They remind us where we came from, but traditions should never become so heavy that they crush the very people they were meant to support. Today, when young mothers in our community ask me for advice, I never begin by telling them what they should do. Instead, I ask one simple question: how are you healing? Because every mother deserves to be seen, every mother deserves to be heard, and every mother deserves the freedom to care for both her child and herself without believing that love requires losing her own voice. That was the lesson my family learned together, not through arguments, not through shame, but through humility, honest conversation, and the courage to choose compassion over unquestioned habit. And in the end, that became the greatest tradition we could pass on.